Well, I am very pleased to introduce our next two speakers who I've had the good fortune of knowing for a very long time, really good souls. Claire McHenry is the Deputy Director, Securities Bureau with the Nebraska Department of Banking and Finance. Ms. McHenry has over 15 years of state securities regulation experience and is an active North American Securities Administrators Association member. She earned her Bachelor of Science in Business Administration from Washington University in St. Louis and a Juris Doctorate from American University, Washington College of Law. Very impressive. And then Antonia Bonsera is a program specialist with the Nebraska Department of Health and Human Services, Division of Children and Families. Tony's responsibilities are broad, generally involving developing and implementing policy, work instructions, and public guidance, and focusing on safety for children and vulnerable adults, providing technical support and training to field staff, and educational presentations regarding adult protective services, mandatory reporting requirements, and assessment procedures. These are some of the duties that Tony truly enjoys. A native of Pennsylvania, Tony joined Nebraska Department of Health and Human Services in 2005. So please join me in welcoming Claire.
Just thank you very much in general for inviting us. Happy to talk to you today about financial services and older adults. Today we're going to be talking about generally some of the concerns that people in financial professionals when they're dealing with older adults, and a lot of it has to deal with, does this person have capacity? Are they potentially being exploited? So we're going to talk about what the definitions of financial exploitation, some of the red flags that you may see when you're dealing with an older adult, some of the tools that are out there for financial services and financial professionals, how APS works in Nebraska, and any additional resources that may be available to you. So start with Tony.
So in Nebraska, APS eligibility is not age-based, other than an individual has to be over the age of 18 to be eligible for our services. Any person 18 years of age or older who has a substantial mental or functional impairment, or for whom a guardian or conservator has been appointed under the probate code, is also eligible. A substantial functional impairment means that the adult is physically impaired, and this restricts their ability to complete the activities of daily living. And a substantial mental impairment can include mental illness and/or dementia, and a guardianship assumes that the individual has a substantial functional or mental impairment, and that's already been determined by the court. So bad financial decisions do not equate to financial exploitation. People have the right to make poor decisions and spend their money in ways that we do not approve of. Our guiding values in adult protective services include that every action taken by APS must balance the duty to protect the safety of the vulnerable adult with the adult's right to self-determination. The principles for adult protective services were developed by the National Adult Protective Services Association. And they include that adults retain all their civil and constitutional rights unless some of these rights have been restricted by the courts. Adults have the right to make decisions that do not conform with societal norms as long as these decisions don't hurt someone. Adults are presumed to have decision-making capacity unless a court adjudicates otherwise, and they also have the right to refuse our services, which is frustrating but true. Often the public expects APS to intervene in the lives of adults in ways that are outside of our legal authority. And remember that adults have the right to make decisions, even bad decisions, as long as they retain decision-making capacity. These are some of the statistics I tried to get as updated as possible, but, population is aging, so our elder population is aging, growing right along with the population and exceeding in some cases. Seniors do live longer, but not necessarily better. There's a lot of cases of Alzheimer's, dementia, and declining cognitive and physical functioning, which makes elders more vulnerable to victimization. Not many cases are actually reported, maybe 1 in 24. And 1 out of every 5 people over the age of 65 has been victimized by financial fraud. That's a daunting statistic. The amount of money that's lost is enormous. It varies in estimation from $3 billion to over $36 billion per year, depending on what studies you're looking at. And also because it is so underreported, it's probably even higher than those estimations.
So it's a costly problem, it's difficult to address, and what we really do need is for financial services to be part of this solution. And the reason is because people in financial services, the bank teller, the stockbroker, they're often the ones who are actually seeing the money leave the account. They're often the only ones who may know that financial exploitation is occurring. It may be that family lives far away, they're just not as connected to their parent as they may want to be. Maybe that the parent is actively hiding this information from their children. Or it could even be the unfortunate situation, although pretty common, is that it's the children or a family member who is actually doing the exploitation. So when we say that we need financial services to be part of the solution, it's because sometimes you're the only key and link that we have to knowing this is occurring. So if you're concerned, one of the first things that you can do is learn about the red flags of financial exploitation. And there's first suspicious behavior that indicates that there might be a cognitive issue. That isn't that financial exploitation is actually occurring, it's that somebody may be vulnerable to financial exploitation. There's difficulty communicating with you, being hard to or understanding you. They're unable to follow your flow of questions. They're telling you the same thing over and over again, or they're just not remembering things from a previous meeting that you may have had. There's challenging behavior. They can be aggressive or disruptive or just make really inappropriate comments that are not what you would expect at maybe a bank teller line. They're maybe wandering around, and in a financial institution, there's definitely places that you're allowed to be and places that you're not allowed to be. And most of us know this when we go into a bank. You don't cross across the teller line. So if you're seeing people who are wandering around or just unfamiliar with a place that they've been to many times before, this may be a red flag. They may have a difficulty expressing their needs or desires especially when it comes to their money. And this could be because they don't understand it anymore, or they just may not have the words to explain it anymore. There could be some erratic behavior, or they're just unable to process simple concepts. They could fluctuate very quickly between being happy or sad or excited, or they're just unable to follow simple questions. Or there's an indication that there may be impaired judgment, especially around their use of their money. Do they understand the risks and costs of some of the actions that they're taking? A lot of us, what we do because it may be more expensive or it may be cheaper to go that way. If they just don't appreciate that, that may be a red flag. There are other red flags that may be, that there is behavior that can indicate that the person is actually being exploited, in addition to or separate from any other cognitive issues. So there's a new person who wants access to the account. It may be a person that you just wouldn't expect to have access, like the gardener or the long-lost cousin that you've never heard of before. They may have some nervousness or anxiety about talking with you. This could be a sign that they're upset because they no longer understand their own finances, or it may be that they just don't know what their finances are anymore. They may show an unusual amount of deference or fear to the person that they're with. This could be an indication that they're being physically abused or suffering from neglect. They may lack knowledge about their financial status. They just have no idea what's in their account anymore, or where their money is going, or where it's coming from. Another red flag is that you're not able to talk to them directly. Either the person is with them that's preventing them from talking to them alone so you can find out what they need, or it may be that they answer on behalf of the client, always answering on behalf of the client. Sometimes we've seen it that they'll come into the bank or they'll come into the securities firm and say, well, I've won something amazing, but I have to pay something first. Shh, don't tell anyone. That may be an indication that they may be defrauded in some other way. Or you see a decline in their appearance, either hygiene-wise or in their physical appearance. You may see something wrong with their grooming, something atypical for them. There can also be some signs if you're in the financial services that you see specifically in their account that may be a red flag for them. You see a new person who's trying to get access to that account. They may be making a call on behalf of the client. Usually when the red flag that comes up for the firm is that that person tries to come in without the proper paperwork to actually get access to that account. You'll see sudden and unusual changes to financial documents. Sometimes there'll be a new person who you wouldn't expect being added as a beneficiary or as a joint account. Adding on a new power of attorney from a person you wouldn't expect, or it could be that a beneficiary was split up amongst all the children and all of a sudden it's an aunt you've never heard of. Some unusual account activity, large or frequent withdrawals, attempts to drain the account. All of a sudden you're seeing a lot of insufficient fund activity, so people are making large withdrawals in an attempt to drain the account, but it's triggering any overdrafts that you may see. You'll see a joint account with a new person, especially if that's not a person you would typically expect to be associated with that client. And they're closing accounts or transferring money without regard to any of the costs or penalties that may be associated with that. Again, costs are typically a driver for what we do with our money. If it costs money to close something, we may not do it, but if they're just disregarding it, they may not do that. You may also see some suspicious signatures. If they had really shaky handwriting before and now it's nice, neat, and loopy, maybe indication that it's not the person signing it. We've also seen changes of address. Be on the lookout, especially if that change of address is to another address that's not the person's place of residence. Maybe an attempt to hide their actual location. So you've observed a lot of red flags, and you're concerned that your client may be the victim of financial exploitation. Now what do you do? First things first, follow your internal procedures. And these procedures should at least include how to spot those red flags, how to escalate that within your firm, where and what to report, what information you as a bank or a firm need to include in that report, and what information you can share with other agencies. And if you don't have policies and procedures, I strongly recommend that you create those policies and procedures in your financial institution. Additionally, it's really important to train your employees about what those policies and procedures are, especially the escalation part of it. These situations can be very stressful and often frightening to people in financial services. This is not what we deal with on a day-to-day basis. And having training about what to do next is really important. Another thing you can do is offer safer alternatives. Try to have the client understand the risks that are associated with what they're doing, the costs that are associated with what they're doing. They're trying to open a joint account. Explain what that means. Unfortunately, this doesn't always work. So we have come up with some tools for the financial services industry that can help them in this situation. So in 2020, we enacted FI provisions relating to financial exploitation of a vulnerable adult. And in 2021, we enacted the Nebraska Protection of Vulnerable Adults from Financial Exploitation Act. And these are to provide tools to financial services in addition to offering safer alternatives and maybe just reporting to us. But one of the first things is to report. We can't help you if we don't know. So always report to us. You're not required to report to us. You're not mandatory reporters under APS law in Nebraska. But you can voluntarily report to the Department of Banking and Finance, to APS, and your local law enforcement. A lot of these financial services organizations are subject to a lot of confidentiality requirements, especially under Graham-Leach-Bliley and the Bank Secrecy Act. However, there are exceptions to that confidentiality that allow reporting to these types of agencies. There's also federal protections under the Senior Safe Act. And you may also have a requirement to file a suspicious activity report, otherwise known as a SAR. But I will say that when you're making these types of reports, SARs should not be your first and only option when it comes to reporting. Not everybody gets them. Nebraska APS does not get them directly, so we don't always know that they're there. And so if you're looking to actually get help and services to your clients, we need to know about this. Also, timeliness. These are often very time-sensitive cases, trying to get help and services to people who may be in immediate danger. Getting those reports to us as quickly as possible is essential. Also, to make sure that you include information that is helpful to APS to actually open a case. So information about how that person is vulnerable, going back to those red flags and very clearly detailing out that information for them. And also, if you think somebody's in immediate danger, call 911. Another thing that you can do is, under these new laws, you can actually hold the transaction or disbursement. Often we know that once money leaves the account, it's almost impossible to get it back. And so this is an option to financial institutions and the securities industry to actually prevent money from leaving. The exact mechanics of what the holds on the transactions are a little different between the banking side and the security side. So I put the citations here so you can take a look at that. But the important thing to know is that in order to hold a transaction or a disbursement, all you need is a reasonable belief. You're not making a determination that that person is incapacitated. You're not making a determination that that person is a vulnerable adult or that they are, in fact, exploited. That's a job for APS. It is not your job as a financial services provider to do that. You need a reasonable belief. But when they do that, you can hold or delay certain transactions, and you can hold those up to 30 business days. There are opportunities to expand that further if you need to, but these are tools that are available to you. You also have the tool to potentially notify a third party. A lot of this is also based on reasonableness. Again, the mechanics are a little different between financial institutions and the securities industry, but it allows you to make a report to notify a third party that's associated with that client to let them know that you have concerns. And importantly, you should not notify a person that you actually believe is perpetrating the exploitation. I know that sounds a little obvious, but just to let you know that that should not be one of the people that you notify. That can actually accelerate or increase the amount of abuse or exploitation that that person is suffering from. If you believe that that is happening, don't notify that third party. Notify us, and then we can take the actions that are appropriate.
So Nebraska statute, which is called the APS Act, gives Adult Protective Services in Nebraska the responsibility to investigate reports of adult abuse, neglect, including self-neglect, and exploitation. Our policies, DHHS policies, regulate how we carry out those statutes. APS investigates, intervenes in cases where abuse, neglect, and exploitation is substantiated, but always using the least restrictive interventions possible. In Nebraska, financial professionals are not mandatory reporters. In fact, they don't have to report, but they can. In Nebraska, and some of you may fall into these categories, mandatory reporters include medical professionals, developmental disability professionals, human services professionals and paraprofessionals, law enforcement, caregivers, or employees of a sheltered workshop, owner, operator, or employee of any facility that's licensed by DHHS. That's pretty broad, but it covers who's mandatory. It doesn't mean that people who are not on this list can't make a report. Anyone can report. It's not necessary to provide your name when calling the abuse and neglect hotline. The name of the reporting party is confidential. It can only be disclosed to a county attorney when that's absolutely necessary. And when acting in good faith, reporters and anyone who provides assistance in an investigation of exploitation is immune from any prosecution. As Claire said, a reasonable belief is enough to report financial exploitation, and if you're in doubt, call us. It's 800-652-1999, you'll see that number again. And report it every time, even if the individual has refused help before, even if you think APS didn't do anything the last time I called. Because I assure you, we did something. We took a report. And if the report did not meet the requirements to be accepted for an investigation, it's still part of the record. And when someone else has a concern for that same individual, that's going to also be added to that. And it might take 2 or 3 different people calling, but there's going to come a time where if there's really something going on with that individual, it's going to be investigated, and all the information that you've provided is going to be helpful in that. So please don't lose hope. Oh, what happened? It went crazy.
Okay, you are.
Sorry about that. Okay, we're in an idle TV standby. So no worries.
We got it. It's under control. Thank you. So here's some information about what's been accepted, some of our recent statistics. In 2022, there were 3,593 APS intakes accepted for investigation. That is over 1,000 more than there were the last time I looked in 2019. In 2019, I think we accounted for 15% of the calls to the hotline. We now account for 25%, because it's one hotline for adult and child abuse. So we certainly have had an increase there. The Eastern Service Area, which is the Douglas and Sarpy County areas, accounts for most of the calls, which was 1,378 in 2022. And approximately 26.6% are actually investigated. Of those accepted intakes in 2022, 976 were for 972 were for financial exploitation, and of those, 93, or almost 10%, were substantiated. Why don't we accept everything for investigation? Well, we're a tiny program and we probably couldn't go out and visit all those people, but there's some reasons. In Nebraska, elder abuse doesn't necessarily warrant the attention of Adult Protective Services. Like I said in the beginning, the individual still has to be vulnerable. We've seen people in their 90s who are still living independently, making their own decisions, and they wouldn't be considered vulnerable by our standards. And then we've seen, people in their early 60s or in their 40s who are definitely vulnerable. And of course, because we cover that population of people with developmental disabilities as well, they could be as young as 18 or 19 years old and still be eligible for our services. However, even if the individual is older and Adult Protective Services can't investigate, that doesn't mean law enforcement won't. Law enforcement will investigate it. If there's a crime, they're going to investigate it. What you should know is if you make a report to Adult Protective Services, regardless of whether we accept it for an investigation or not, that report is forwarded to the local law enforcement of wherever that individual is living. So we share with them and they share with us. If law enforcement gets a report about a vulnerable individual, then the following business day, that report comes to us as well. The hotline, which is located in Omaha, is responsible for the intake duties of the entire state. It's manned 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, 365, even on Christmas. You can call the hotline. Their duties are to elicit information from the reporter and make a screening decision to decide if that report meets the criteria for an investigation. Once it's been determined that it meets that criteria, it goes to our service areas or to the local office where the APS investigator is located and is assigned to them. And then their duty is to investigate the abuse, provide any services that are necessary, and also, again, request law enforcement assistance if that's needed or warranted. And then if they've determined that there might have been a crime committed, law enforcement's notified also the local county attorney, so things can be prosecuted from there. Not all victims of fraud are vulnerable adults. Just being a victim doesn't necessarily make you a vulnerable adult, and that is an argument that comes up quite frequently. But people who become victims of scams can be cognitively intact and able to decide how to spend their money. Some of them even suspect that it's a scam. Unfortunately, people get lonely and they continue to pay people to talk to them. You know, there's lots of sweetheart scams out there. One of the popular ones is the grandparent scam, where somebody calls you, and I think with artificial intelligence this is going to get even worse because they'll be able to make it actually sound like the person. I kind of have a funny story about that. It's funny because no money was spent, but several years ago, my daughter's paternal grandmother got a phone call, and the caller said, you know, Mom, it's Vicky, and I'm in Florida, and I've been arrested, and I don't want to tell Mom and Dad. Please send me, you know, whatever the money was. Fortunately, Judy was with it enough that she didn't give them any money. She called her son and said, I just got a phone call from Vicky, and she said she's in Florida and she got arrested. Well, at the time Vicky was living in Oklahoma, but she, you know, anyway, she said, I don't know, I think it was Vicky. It sounded like Vicky. Well, here's the thing. My ex-mother-in-law was in the beginning stages of dementia at the time. The thing about Vicky is she's profoundly deaf. And it's very easy to tell when she's talking to you because her voice is very distinctive. So her dad said, no, Mom, that wasn't Vicky. I'm glad you didn't send her any money. But these things happen. They get their information off of social media. I'm sure Vicky had posted, you know, I love my mom, and somebody had found that and got the information. Anyway, but even younger, vibrant people fall victim to computer scams, and just because it's an older person who loses money to a scam artist still doesn't make them vulnerable. We can all lose money to scam artists. If you need to call the hotline, there is information that we hope you can report, but don't not make the call just because you don't have all the information. So we would like to know the name, address, and age of the adult. If you don't have their address, don't worry about it. Just call and give as much as you can. Any information about their cognitive functions, give the names and addresses of any caregivers, and talk about what the alleged abuse or neglect is, any evidence of previous abuse, and identifying the information about the perpetrator, and anything else that's helpful. The most important thing, I think Claire mentioned it earlier, is tell the hotline staff why this person is vulnerable. There's a lot of intakes that come across that are not accepted, and the line across the top is no vulnerability information was provided. So let them know that. Keep talking. Tell them anything you can.
And I'll just jump in here. We get a lot of reports, then our process is that we refer every report that we receive over to the APS hotline as well. But what we found from financial services professionals that they end up telling us way more than they tell APS. So you can tell us more, it's fine, but we're gonna just tell APS. But you'll tell us the vulnerability when you won't tell APS the vulnerability. So include as much information as you possibly can. It'll get over there anyway, but when they have it first, they're able to act faster.
True. And I mentioned earlier that calls can be anonymous. You don't have to give your name, you don't have to give your phone number, but it's really helpful if you do. The worker who's assigned to that may have questions about the intake, and so it really helps if they have somebody that they can call and say, well, you said this, but what about that? And I'm not in the field, I'm not doing that work, but I know from their experience that they've shared with me that that's really helpful. Once we do start investigating a case, see there's that phone number again, put it on speed dial. Once we've accepted a case, after the report is made and assigned to the local office, if the APS specialist determines there is a need for ongoing services, then it may be open for an ongoing case management. When there's no longer a need for our involvement, we close the case. So there's your little chart of how things go. It can be closed at intake if there's no vulnerability information or it doesn't meet criteria. It can be closed during the investigation if it's determined that the adult is not at risk and services aren't needed, or it can continue. We can keep a case open for 180 days and then we can renew it for another 180 days. Ordinarily, when we have a case open for ongoing services, we're trying to find services in the community that can assist that person, and then we get them connected to those services. Sometimes the need is they have to find a better place to live, or that can meet their needs, and we can assist with that. In some cases, the need is that this individual can no longer make their own decisions or manage their life on their own, and they don't have family or anybody who's available to assist them, so then we do assist them to find guardians. I think that comes up in a later slide. So there we are. If we have slides on what we can and what we cannot do, because there's a lot of misconception about what we can do. Our name sounds suspiciously like Child Protective Services, so people tend to think that we can do the things that CPS does. Well, we can investigate, and they investigate, but we can't go to take somebody out of their home. We can't remove people and put them into grown-up foster care. That just doesn't exist. Some states have it, but not Nebraska. We can work with law enforcement and the county attorney to get cases prosecuted if necessary. And we can, if an individual no longer has the capacity to make their own decisions, and they are not willing to cooperate, or they don't have a guardian who can assist us to cooperate, we can request involuntary services, but we have to go through the courts for that, and it doesn't happen very often. So like I said, we usually make service referrals to community providers, and we do have some money right now. It won't go on forever, but the American Rescue Plan Act provided us with some dollars, so we are able to do some real material and service assistance for people where we can just pay for stuff. If somebody needs to make their house a little more accessible so they can stay there, we'll do that. If somebody doesn't have a home and they need to be put up in a hotel for a while we find them a permanent place to live, we can do that. We've been paying utilities, we've been making repairs to individuals, usually caregivers' cars, so that people can make their appointments. Just a long laundry list of things that we've been able to do since we've had this money. Unfortunately, we won't have it forever, but every opportunity that you have to let your Congress people know that Adult Protective Services needs money, please do that. Another part of that is that Adult Protective Services has never been on the federal budget. We've never had a line item for APS until this current budget. And we didn't get nearly the monies that we were hoping for. but we're in the budget, and we did get some money, which means that next time we'll be in the budget and we'll get more money, as long as people continue to push and vote that way, and let their, let all your Congress people know that. You need to keep that up. What we can't do, we cannot become a guardian for a person. We can help them find one, but we can't become the guardian. We can't remove anyone, we can't force anybody who has capacity to accept our services, and we can only become involved when we have jurisdiction. So it has to have happened in Nebraska. That's a little loose though, like the person can live in Nebraska, but the perpetrators may be outside of Nebraska, if the bank is in Nebraska, or if the person's bank is outside of Nebraska, but the person's in Nebraska, we can still work on it. As long as there's a connection to Nebraska, we can work on a case.
So there's also some additional resources for financial services, but before I get to that, I'd just like to reemphasize some of the comments that Tony made, because I know that my firms talk to me a lot about it, which is APS does nothing, completely untrue. APS does something, it just may be behind the scenes, and you may not as a financial service provider know what that something is. Also, people have the right to refuse services, so it may be very possible that that person refused the services that they had. Also, bad financial decisions does not equal vulnerable. Being the victim of fraud doesn't mean vulnerable, and it doesn't mean exploitation has occurred. So just to re-emphasize that for our financial services providers, I know that's very frustrating for us because we see people losing money and making bad decisions with their money. That can be a frustrating thing, but people are allowed to make bad decisions with their money. In addition to the resources and tools that are available under the Act, you can also look to the law enforcement. If you believe that person is in immediate danger, call 911. Talk to the local police, the sheriff, or other law enforcement. Provide information about what you're seeing that makes you concerned about their immediate safety, and make the report to law enforcement. There are also some community resources that are available. You can't require or you can't make reports to them. These have to be done with client consent in order to make the referrals to these community-based services. Or you can provide your clients with information about these particular services. Legal Aid of Nebraska, and the information is here, can provide legal services that can help with drafting a power of attorney or healthcare directives or wills and estates. So there may be services that Legal Aid can provide. Local area agencies on aging can provide other services like transportation or heating services, or they can help find food help or food stamps or Meals on Wheels and those types of services. I've also included information here about domestic violence and sexual assault, and this is a difficult conversation to have with financial services professionals because they don't want to think about this aspect of financial exploitation and abuse. But the reality is that abuse often follows abuse. If somebody is experiencing financial exploitation and abuse, it is very likely that they're experiencing other types of abuse and neglect. So these may be resources that are appropriate for them, but it's also to let you know that, and I'm not being dramatic here, this is important. This is helping people's lives. When we're talking about making these reports, you're talking about their physical safety as well. So think about that also when you're developing your reporting procedures and how important this is. Any questions? We have a few minutes. Yes.
One from online says, are banks generally transparent if a customer asks if they have any written policies for managing red flags and the training they give to their employees, or that stays up to date on reporting tools, laws, etc.? The question is wondering how to shop for a financial institution that may be better to work with older adults and families that is more proactive about suspicious activities.
I can't speak for the banking side. I would say that likely there is not an obligation to provide that type of disclosure. As a customer, I would ask and see. Whether or not they respond or have something in place, they may not be able to say. Yes.
Another one just says, are you able to assist someone in their 70s get caught up on rent to prevent eviction? This individual has a client in their housing program that has fallen 2.5 months behind on their portion of rent and will be evicted if they do not get it caught this month.
You're asking me that question? The answer is yes. So if they have an open adult protective services case, then their caseworker can assist with that. If they do not, then we actually have community support specialists here in Nebraska. And you might have to reach out to me to get the email address. But the way that works is they don't have an open case with us, but they're still at risk and meet some of our criteria. And then the CSS, the Community Support Specialists, also have access, because we've given them access to some of our money. It's your money, it's the public's money, to assist with things like that. And depending on what part of the state they're in, they would have there's like 5 different people who do that. But reach out to me and I will pass it along to the right person. Yes, ma'am?
So, I find it interesting, because I've heard this numerous times, but why are financial institutions not mandatory reporters, but yet medical providers, social workers, therapists, like all these others that have strong confidentiality are?
Tell your legislator. It's different in different states. You know, I know that in some states, financial professionals are Mando reporters, but do you have any insight on why they're not here?
Why they're not here, it's set by statute and it was not included as part of the list of mandatory reporters.
The industry may not want to be mandatory reporters.
And they may not want to be,
Well,
but they should be.
nobody wants to be, right? But seriously, reach out to your legislators, because that's the way we get things changed.
I would encourage anybody who has a suspicion of, that someone is being exploited, is a vulnerable adult, to go ahead and make that report, whether or not they are a mandatory reporter. As I said, it's vitally important that we get this information. We can't take action if we don't know that something is going on. And some of the mandatory reporting that the financial services industry has with the suspicious activity reports is simply not enough for us to know in a timely way that those actions are occurring.
We have one more quick question.
If the financial exploitation happened over state lines, can this be reported? And if it can, what state would you report it to?
I would report it to both.
I
If you
would-
report
yeah.
it to Nebraska and Nebraska says, we think this isn't our jurisdiction because it happened in South Dakota, then we're going to call South Dakota. But I would definitely report to both states.
I receive reports from firms that are out of state because often their headquarters are in a different state or their compliance people are out of state. Where I see firms reporting is it follows the client. They'll go to the state where the client is.
Well, Tony and Claire, this has just been a brilliant presentation. Thank you both very much. For those of you that are in the financial industry, we hope you found this information of great value. We know we certainly did, so thank you again. Thank you. Let's give it up for them.